Over the past few months, I've been getting into a lot more of the difficult, shall we say, kind of games. I started my journey with the Dark Souls trilogy and absolutely enjoyed that. And even went on and absolutely enjoyed all of From Software Souls games in general, all the way from Demon Souls to Elden Ring. Then I went searching for something that'll offer a similar sense of challenge that is also tied to the game's narratives, worlds, or stories. At first, I found games like Fear and Hunger based off of the Super Red Patch 12 video that he did, and then I also got into Darkest Dungeon, which became one of my favorite games of all time, though the second game maybe not so much. But after reaching a dead end, searching for games with the same kind of vibe, I eventually stumbled into a game called Lobotomy Corporation. It was one of the weirdest, addictive games I've ever played. The game definitely had a lot of issues, but you could still feel the passion the devs put into the story. So how Lobotomy Corporation works is that each day you complete in the game, a new story gets revealed all the way up to day 50. But sadly, I'm gonna be the first to admit, I never got to the end of Lobotomy Corporation, or at least not the true ending. I got up all the way I think to day 47, where to my memory, the game locked me out of the true ending since I had to complete all the Sephiroth's questline, and I just felt dread having to replay the entire game again after so much struggle and pain. So I'm not gonna lie, I just looked up the rest of the story on YouTube.
Oh brother, this guy.
Now wait a minute, because the next game in their lineup is actually now one of my favorite games ever. I'm not a huge fan of card/deck building games in general, but Ruina for me mixes the fun gameplay aspect with the story extremely well. It's still, to this day, I think one of the best conclusion story for a video game in general. I was satisfied with the way they wrote the new main characters in the game, and how its story ties into the previous characters/cast from the first game. And of course, how can I forget about melee songs? A huge reason why Ruina for me delivered in the boss fight extremely well. Like, listen to this. Overall, I finished Library of Ruina feeling very satisfied. It is a masterfully crafted game. But then, I realized Project Moon has one more game left to offer. But the moment I found out that it was a gacha, my heart sank, thinking Project Moon had become one of those money-hungry companies that made a buggy/messy live service game just for a quick cash grab. An incomplete package disguised as a game is what I thought at first. But after doing a bit more research, I eventually found out that Limbus Company isn't like all the other girls. No. Apparently, it is one of the most free-to-play friendly gacha ever, because Project Moon ran out of budget halfway through the development of their actual third game, and had to develop a live service game instead, without actual prior knowledge on making or even maintaining one in the first place. So I decided to actually give it a shot. How did it turn out? Well, that's what the rest of the video is for. Alright, so before we actually discuss anything regarding the game, I'm going to try to answer one of the most frequently asked questions regarding Limbus. Do I need to have played the previous two games, Lobotomy Corporation and Library of Ruina, to enjoy or even get the basics of Limbus? And the very simple answer would be no. Whilst I do think having played both the previous games would most definitely increase your enjoyment of Limbus Company, you would do just fine starting with Limbus since it follows a new cast mostly unrelated to the old one. Alright, so I feel like I didn't give enough nuance in my explanation here, so I'm gonna explain it a bit more. What I meant by mostly unrelated to the old one are all the callbacks and references to both Lobotomy Corporation and Library of Ruina with some of the game's IDs, particularly the ones from the Walpurgis Night event, being a reference to the previous games. Also, one more thing I'd like to add here is that you'd probably miss out on the general concepts of the world of Project Moon that has been built in the past two games, and you'll probably even experience minor spoilers from Limbus regarding the ending of both Lobotomy Corporation and Library of Ruina. So I do recommend, if you can, you start the game in chronological order, but if you can't, starting with Limbus should definitely be fine. Now, whilst editing this video, I also just remembered that Project Moon also has their own comic and web novels that are also worth checking out, namely Wanderlab, a story about LobCorp branch agents that takes place during LobCorp, Leviathan, a story about Virgilius that takes place post-Ruina but pre-Limbus, and finally Distortion Detective, which to my memory is a story that takes place alongside the events of Ruina and extends even a bit after it. These are all a fun read and explains a lot of concepts inside the city a bit more, so I highly recommend you check them out. Limbus Company is the third installment in the Project Moon lineup of games, at least so far. Their previous two games, Lobotomy Corporation and Library of Ruina, both take place in the same setting as Limbus does. Okay, so now I'm going to attempt my best to give you a very brief rundown on the setting of the story. It takes place in a dystopian futuristic metropolis appropriately called The City. In The City, there are 23 different districts, where in a single district, there is always a wing which is named using a single alphabet ranging from A to Y, and the backstreets from District 1 to District 25 corresponding with the order of alphabet for each district. Now each wing is in charge of the protection of a nest, which are basically the counterparts to the backstreets. A wing is defined by the possession of a singularity, for example T-Corp, which is in possession of a singularity called the Time Track, which allows the full control of the usage of time in that entire specific area, which includes District 20. This of course creates a huge mess which limits the ownership of time only to the rich in said district, because every single citizen in T-Corp and by extension District 20 are obligated to pay the time tax. And if you fail to meet the criteria, they'll send out the time collectors after you. This is probably all I'll discuss regarding T-Corp, considering you'll find out more about the nuance and inner workings of it in the games, including Limbus itself. Now there are multiple occupations you can choose to be in the city, but the most predominant one is called a fixer, which are the all-around handyman of the city. They are separated into grades ranging from grade 9 to grade 1, where the higher your grade is usually signifying the higher your combat prowess, self-worth, and in turn your pay is. There is also an official title given out to the best of grade 1s called a collar. In the previous two games, you explored the role of a wing called L-Corp or Lobotomy Corporation, and the lasting aftermath of all the doings of said wing. I'm not gonna go into too much detail regarding the previous game, since I think to this day it is still best enjoyed on your own accord. But in Limbus, you take the role of executive manager called Dante for a group called the Sinners, working directly under the namesake of the aforementioned company, Limbus Company, alongside the guide of the boss Virgilius, who is a collar fixer, known as the Red Gaze, and Charon, the not-so-trusty driver of the bus itself. By the way, I saw comments on Twitter saying Virgilius looks like Korean Mads Mikkelsen, and I gotta say, that's pretty damn accurate. Throughout your journey, you'll encounter many different characters from the different backgrounds, all with their own personal struggles and goals in the city. But the main goal of the formation of this division of the Limbus Company is for the retrieval of the Golden Bows. Now, for what these Golden Bows are and what they do exactly, since they kinda explained that in the first game and expands upon it even further in Limbus Company, I won't be explaining further. Now, after I hopefully already sold you on the premise of the Project Moon setting, let's go over the gameplay for Limbus Company, which there are a lot I need to talk about here. So the gameplay of Limbus actually feels like a derivative of their previous game, Library of Ruina, with a bit more, or some people would even say less, nuance to it. As the manager Dante, you can select any of the 12 sinners to deploy into the field. I'm gonna go over the very basic details of the gameplay, bear with me. Now, there are 3 attack types in the game, which are Slash, Pierce, and Blunt, which each enemy is either injured, weak, or have normal resistance to said attack types. Each sinner also possesses 5 different abilities they are able to do, which the game labels as being skills. There are 4 basic skills, each with their own attack types. The other skill is always either a counter, guard, or evade. The other ability you can do is called Ego, which are the manifestation of the sinner's mental space formed into a weapon, or basically in layman's terms, your ultimate.
이상이 무엇이라 생각하시오?
Each single skill also has their own coin count, where each single coin represents how many hits you're going to do with that skill. Also, every time you lose a clash against another opponent, you lose 1 coin from the total amount you have. Coins can flip either heads or tails, where flipping heads is the preferred outcome of the two. This is also a great time to introduce the sanity mechanic of the game, where the game labels it as SP. In short, each sinner has an SP range from negative 45 SP to 45 SP. With, of course, the lower into the negatives you go, the worse it's gonna be for your sinner, where they'll either go into a panic state, stunning them for a single turn, or even worse, get ego corrosion, where you lose control of them after they force themselves to use ego and attacking indiscriminately. Then after that, we have passives for each sinner. Passives are basically additionals that can be triggered after meeting a certain condition in an encounter. I'll go over it a bit more later. Also, one more thing to mention is each skill also has a sin affinity, based on the 7 deadly sins, except for one, which is greed. In order, they are wrath, lust, sloth, gluttony, gloom, pride, and envy. Now, with all the notable basics out of the way, how does the actual gameplay work, you might ask? Well, you see, there are 2 types of encounters in games so far, which are focused and non-focused encounters. The more common of the two being non-focused encounters, where you have to chain the skills of one sinner to another and build up your sin affinities. And once you trigger skills with the same sin affinity for usually up to 3 times, you can trigger the passive of the sinner it is relevant to. It sounds more complicated than it actually looks. Once you've accumulated a certain amount of sin affinities, you can consume those to manifest or use your ego. Now, I've said before that ego are like your ultimates in this game, which is true, but what I would add is that ego can be very situational in its usage. In general, ego has a higher clash power than a base skill, meaning if your attacks are not doing so hot, you can just pop an ego and it'll usually change it from something like struggling to neutral or even dominating at times. The other thing is, ego, just like any other skills, also has its own unique quirks and attributes it inflicts on the enemy when it lands, which in most cases can actually fit a specific team or meta you're building very well, and even turn the tides in a losing battle. Again, the combat sounds much more complicated than it actually looks. Overall, the most important thing in Limbus is your literacy, in assessing the opponent's skills and passives, and building a proper team in response to said enemy. Or just shred the most broken IDs in the game like me and press win rate on every battle. Oh, and if you don't know what IDs are, well, now is the perfect time to talk about it. So now that we've gone over the gameplay, I guess it's finally time to talk about the most important aspect of a gacha game, which is of course the gacha and the currency system of the game. So one might ask, how does Limbus handle its gacha in comparison to other games? And to answer this question, I'm going to do a quick roundabout trips of explanations regarding the extraction system of Limbus. So firstly, to even perform an extraction, you'd require Limbus' gacha currency, which are called lunacies, with a single extract costing you 130 lunacy and a 10 pull or a multi setting you back 1300 lunacy. Now let's talk about what I think Limbus does that's very unique in opposed to every single gacha game ever, is that you cannot pull any characters. Instead, it's the variations of the characters from the mirror worlds that is canonical to the game's worlds, or in the game's terms, identities, or IDs for short. Also, another thing you can pull from it are the egos. Of course, like every other gacha, both IDs and egos have their own rarity each. Let's start with the IDs. They are separated into 3 categories, the 1-star, the 2-star, and the 3-star. 1-star would be an equivalent of an R, 2-star an SR, and 3-star your SSR. Whilst ego are separated into 5 different categories, with their name schemes being a reference to the classification system of the first and the second game. And as far as I know, Hebrew letters starting from Zain, Teth, He, and whilst the 5th category aka Aleph haven't even been introduced to the game as of the making of this video. As for how rare the ID and egos are, well, you would have an 83% chance of pulling a 1-star, 12.8% chance of pulling a 2-star, and a 2.9% chance of pulling a 3-star, with you being guaranteed to at least pull a single 2-star ID every time you do a 10 pull. Now egos on the other hand are all grouped into a single percentage, at 1.3% chance regardless of the ego rarity or class, meaning you would have the same amount of chance to pull a 10th ego as a WoW ego. It is worth noting that Limbus, like every other gacha, also has a pity system called the Yisang points. The pity triggers once you've done 200 pulls or 20 multis, which as a reference point, games like Wuthering Waves triggers at a pity around 80 pulls, and games like FGO triggering at 330 pulls. The other mechanic I nearly forgot to mention is that you don't need to earn dupes for both IDs and egos. One and only one copy is absolutely necessary to maximize your ID to the best possible result. Any dupes you get from IDs will automatically be converted into threads, which are the currency used for uptying both your IDs and your egos. Now uptying is basically this game's version of Ascension. Think of games like Wuthering Waves where you can ascend the characters, though the difference being that uptying doesn't allow you to further increase your levels. Instead, it upgrades the skills your identities and egos have. Now you might ask yourself this, all the things I've told you so far, it does seem like Limbus already earns itself a positive by not making dupes viable to maxing out certain characters, and even equipment gear or egos. But to win you guys over even more, I'll finally get to the mechanic that completely sealed the deal for me. Genuinely, I think this mechanic is what gives Limbus a complete edge over most if not every single gacha in terms of being a free-to-play player. Of course, again like most modern gacha nowadays, Limbus also has a battle pass system and a shard system, with Limbus's battle pass being divided into two categories: the normal unpaid pass, which every manager will have access to, and then the paid Limbus pass, which costs 1300 lunacy, though I want to preface that it requires 1300 paid lunacy, not free lunacy. There's also one more version of the battle pass you can get for 1700 lunacy, called the Limbus Pass package. It's basically the same version of the paid Limbus Pass with a few more tidbits included in the package, such as a free 10 level upgrade for the pass, level boost ticket 5, and 2 special package banners that you can only earn after getting this version of the pass. Though if you're like me and you don't really care about collectibles, I do recommend just investing into the normal Limbus Pass that costs 1300 paid lunacy. And the reason being is that in Limbus Company, you technically don't even have to pull for new units from banners if you have the Battle Pass. Kinda, let me explain. So the way you get levels for the pass itself is divided into two methods, with one being the standard leveling up by finishing your dailies, weeklies, or even your seasonals. But the other and more ideal way of gaining levels would be the mirror dungeons, which is one of the canon to the story game modes that features a roguelike mechanic, where you'll start up with a team you've chosen and gain artifacts while progressing through the dungeons. You can do either the normal mode or the hard mode, with the hard mode featuring certain bosses from the main story. Of course, this also results in you getting more leveling points after completing a run of the dungeons. The mirror dungeons are reset every week, and each week you get to use a maximum of 3 weekly bonus, with each bonus allowing you to claim both leveling points and lunacy. Though if you don't feel like doing 3 mirror dungeon runs in a single week, you can also just straight up use all 3 at once, giving you 3 times the normal reward for a regular dungeon run. If you at least do 1 mirror dungeon run using this method, you might get around 30 levels in a single run, making you be able to max out your battle pass very quickly, which brings us to the sharding system in the game. Each time you level up your battle pass, you'll get different rewards depending on your current level. One of the many rewards you can obtain from leveling up your pass is one of the 2 types of shard crates, with the random one obviously giving you between 1 to 3 shards per crate for a random sinner, whilst the regular one giving you still 1 to 3 shards but for a sinner of your choosing. And what I forgot to mention previously is that once you get your battle pass to level 120, aka maxing out your battle pass, if you have the paid pass, each level starting from 120, you are guaranteed to get 3 shard crates, meaning if you are diligent in your farming of the mirror dungeons, which will give you roughly 250 points per completion, which is equivalent of around 25 levels, which is also equivalent of around 75 shard crates per run of the dungeon. Though it is worth mentioning, the calculation I did here is with the hard mode of the mirror dungeon. And now we get to the fun part, which are the ID and Ego shard exchange. Like the name suggests, it is an all-around exchange shop where you can trade in the shards you've earned for both identities and ego. A single 3-star identity and ego costing you 400 shards, and a 2-star identity costing you 150 shards. And considering the fact that I've told you earlier, where a single hard mirror dungeon run giving you a rough estimation between 40 to 70 crates, a very quick calculation would suggest that it is very easy to earn IDs and in retrospect even egos in this game. And this is even further improved by the fact that you only need threads to uptie both IDs and egos, making this game one of the easiest to farm and in my opinion most free-to-play friendly gacha I've ever played. The only downside of this shard exchange method is that Project Moon sadly implemented a new mechanic where you have to wait a week before you can even shard the character of the current ID and ego of an ongoing banner, which to be fair isn't even that big of a setback if you're a patient player like me. The funny thing is, Kim Ji-hoon, the CEO of Project Moon, frankly admits that this mechanic was implemented so they can garner more funds for their anime. So if this is for a good cause, I'm fine with supporting them, and it's not like earning lunacy is even that hard to begin with. The last section I want to touch on is probably this one. Events in Limbus are pretty interesting because it usually translates to the intervalos, which are in between chapters, meaning short side stories that are canon to the main story. Now these intervalos usually serves as a breakpoint after the conclusion of a canto, but this creates a new problem where you can only access these events after you've reached into that point in the story, which I understand can create some fear of missing out elements from the new players, especially considering the usual generosity of Project Moon with the rewards given to players who participate in these events. Which leads me to my biggest gripe with Limbus Company as of date, which is the fact that there is almost no content to do besides the mirror dungeon and railways. Once you've caught up with all the story has to offer so far, you're just left sitting there waiting for the next content to drop. And sure, like I said earlier, you could just keep grinding the mirror dungeons, but if you're like me and have sunk over 100 hours into the game, you've probably got all the important /best IDs and egos in the game, leaving you with nothing really much to do. Which also in turn leads me to my next issue with the game, and that is the gameplay itself. Yes, with how long I've rambled on about the gameplay, explaining all the complexities of the mechanics and how they play around with each other, you would think the combat in this game is good, and it is, but let's be honest, it gets very repetitive, especially with the inclusion of the win rate button. Once you're super high up in terms of ID leveling and uptying, you could just mindlessly go through the whole game, save for some boss battles where a bit of mandatory reading is required, sure. But even then, it's basically just make it so every clash is dominating or at least favored, or pop out an ego when struggling or hopeless, and then you're good to go. Now I would like to say this particular issue PM seems to be aware of and have made strides toward improving on it. With the Ladies of Unbreakable coins, which to give a very brief summary, are basically attack coins that retain their attack even if it loses a clash, albeit with it losing attack power upon losing in the first place, which hopefully they don't just decide to spam it on every single boss fight in the game.
No. Wait.
And keep thinking up of new ways to even further make the manager just straight up think and not just go mindlessly press the win rate button. Also, the other very small complaint that I could see people having is that the dub is only in Korean. There is no English or Japanese dub for this game. But you gotta understand, Project Moon is a relatively small team when compared to most other developers in the field. And this has been pretty consistent since the CEO himself said that he wants to keep the team relatively small, probably only around a bit over 50 employees, with a few of them not even working directly for the development of the games, rather for their restaurant/cafe that exists within the lore of the games called Hammam Pang Pang, which I sadly have never been to because it only has one branch so far in Suwon, South Korea. Alright, and that brings us to the end of the video. I started scripting and recording before Kanto 8 even released, and as of writing this particular segment or part of the video, the second part of the Kanto is literally a day away from release. So as to not prolong the video any longer, I'll just leave some of my closing thoughts as to why I hold Limbus Company and therefore PM itself as somewhat a golden standard that most other gacha should strive for. And the biggest contributing factor as to why that is that Limbus doesn't really feel like a gacha. Instead, it feels more like a single-player, story-driven game that gets continuous updates instead. And on top of that, you can just feel the utmost care the devs put into the story, characters, music, and especially world building, which most players would agree are the biggest selling points of Limbus Company itself. Trust me, the things I've mentioned in the story section doesn't even cover half of what the world that Project Moon has to offer. The concepts of abnormalities, how the wings play with one another, the heads of the city, what egos and distortions are, there's so much left for you to explore. And the way the game unravels the plot threads carefully and drop hints and tidbits regarding future events is, I think, also done pretty masterfully. I might even do a video in the future to explore the bigger themes of the overall Project Moon universe, as I think it is one of the most intriguing ones I've ever experienced. Alright, as I've said before, I don't want to yap any further. Thank you so much for watching to the end of the video and listening to my crazy ramblings about this game I love so dearly, and I'll hopefully see you again on the next video.